In this Foundations module, I want to talk about measurement. It sounds like it should be very simple, but we're going to discover that there are a number of potential problems, and there's a real danger that you can measure the wrong things if you're not a bit careful. So we're going to talk about 4 direct measures of account management performance, and they're the really important ones. Then we'll talk about some indirect measures or success drivers, things like customer satisfaction, relationship, perhaps quality scores. And this is important too, because a high quality score doesn't necessarily mean you're in a strong position. It may do, but it might not. So let's start at the beginning and consider the main commercial measures of success. The first measure to select is obvious, and it's sales revenue. It's obvious because this is one of the core measures for any business as a whole. It would be an unusual business indeed which did not measure sales revenue, so we don't really need to say any more about that. Sales revenue is a very good measure for the CFO, but is a good measure for the account manager and the success of the account manager. Well, not necessarily. Why not? Well, what if your key account itself is in a high growth sector and it's growing really quickly? The chances are very good that your revenue with the key account will be growing too, but not necessarily because you're driving the growth, but because the customer is giving you the business. So we're not necessarily measuring the ability of the account manager. We might be, but we might not be. What about the alternative situation? Suppose now that your key accounts business is contracting, or perhaps all the business is moving to a different geography. Now, here it's likely that your sales revenue would be falling, but not because of any fault of your own. So you can see that we need a measure which demonstrates the effectiveness of the account manager to drive the business. And so we use share of the available business with the key account. How much business do you have of the available business? Share of the customer's business is a very good measure because it tells us how effective you are at account management. A growing share suggests you're doing the right things. A declining share suggests the opposite. And because it tells you how important you are to the key account. Just because your sales revenue is growing doesn't mean you're driving growth, and just because it's falling doesn't mean you're failing. If your share is growing, then the chances are high that you're doing a good job. Also, share tells us how important we are for the customer. If you have a large share of the customer's business, you're likely to be seen as a more important supplier. Share also tells you about the potential for growth. And of course, this too is very important. A small share indicates high growth potential. So share of the customer's business should be one of our core measures because it gives you 3 important pieces of information. It tells you how you're performing as an account manager, how important you are to the customer, and also what the potential for growth really is. But the bit that sometimes causes the problem is, what do we mean by share of the customer's business? How should we calculate this share figure? It sounds great in theory, but is it possible to work it out? And this is the question which many account managers will struggle with. So what should we do? Well, a good way to start is to think about all the potential business you could possibly do with this customer. In other words, if you supply widgets, then you want to know the total value of all the widgets bought by the customer. You know the value of the widgets you supply, so then it becomes a simple matter of calculating the percentage of your share. Easy. But wait a minute, I hear you cry. We may not want to supply all the possible business. Why not? Well, it may be that some of it's just too low margin, or too complex, or we don't have that capability, or we have to supply into another country, or who knows what else. The fact is that you may not want to supply everything. So an important aspect of account management is to figure out just what you should be supplying to the key account. So in addition to working out the total available business, you should also aim to work out the size of the business you're really interested in supplying, because that's the important number for you. Of all the business you want to supply, how much do you actually supply? This is probably the best a working measure of share. However, don't neglect to work out the total available percentage, because that's still the best measure of your importance to the customer, and also helps you determine the key account's likely attitude towards you. In the growth planning modules, we'll discuss key account strategy, and we'll see that an important aspect is to identify the key account's own purchasing strategy. If your share falls below a certain level, you may start to be less interesting to the key account, and as part of the almost inevitable drive to consolidate suppliers, you may find yourself managed out. So once again, you can see how important it is to understand your share of the customer's business. Now, sometimes it's not so easy to work out your share. You may not know enough about the customer may be in a very complex environment, or perhaps your product or service is not a regular purchase, or even it's part of a much greater, more complex purchase. But nevertheless, you still need to estimate your share. Exactly how to work out your share will depend largely on the sort of industry you're in, but whatever industry, a good start is to talk with the key account itself. So revenue is important, as is share, but these two alone are not enough. Why not? Well, we could easily increase both if we slashed the prices. We wouldn't make any money, but we would achieve our sales revenue target. But of course, key account management is all about achieving sales revenue and margin growth together. So cutting the price to win sales, well, that's just not an option. It also means that our next measure must be margin, not profit, because we can of course increase profit by cutting the margin and driving sales, but that's not a good long-term strategy. So margin has to be the measure, and we see that these two core measures for key accounts performance from the point of view of the CEO are revenue and margin, and from the point of view of the key account manager are share and margin. Before we go on to the next unit, I'll leave you to think about share and margin, make some notes, and then we'll talk about the next part of measurement when we get together again.